Jasper National Park Wildfire, July 2024. A video explainer by Friends of Science Society. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and Alberta and the world is facing a great sadness because a wildfire has ripped through Jasper National Park, a place that's loved by so many of us here in Alberta and so many tourists, visitors, hikers, campers from around the world. But there are things that could have been done, should have been done, must be done to prevent this kind of thing in the future. And I'd like to walk through some of the historical elements related to Jasper National Park and also some wildfire material that we got from our forestry and wildfire consultant. So some of it is a bit complicated. A lot of it is very straightforward and visual. You can stop or start anytime, go have a coffee. It's a bit of a long one, but I think it's really important that people understand these things because, of course, we see that the green faction out there is claiming that this is caused by climate change, and I think you'll see pretty clearly that it's not. And that's very important. We don't need any more money being diverted to climate change green crony projects. Just think, $32 billion. It's actually more than that now, but that's what's been invested in EV battery plants. At the same time that was done, 32 million went to British Columbia to fight wildfires. So, this disparity is consequential. In that case, it wasn't related to Jasper National Park, but it's a similar situation where both Alberta and BC, well, pretty much all of Canada has wildfire issues that they face from time to time because just like winter, we have wildfire season every year, and it starts in mid-April and goes well into September, October. So we should be prepared. We should not be scared, and we should not be wasting public funds on green crony climate projects. That said, let's have a look at the historical elements and the science. So it's not climate change. Catastrophic wildfire? Not if, but when. Jasper, Alberta wildfire, July 2024. Now here you see the road into Malign Lake, and all these trees that are red, they're dead. They're dead from mountain pine beetle. But if we look back in time, we find that this was Jasper. And prior to 1913, Jasper was known as Fitzhugh. The Grand Trunk Railroad Survey in 1912 and 1913 ignited huge wildfires south of Grand Prairie, Hinton, and all the way to Robson. In the valley bottoms, this is largely responsible for the uniform age class of the forests. So pine stands means standing groups of forest, become decadent and die between 60 and 80 years old, and we regarded them as over-mature in the year 2000 and at increasing risk to insect attack and wildfire consumption. So this was downtown Jasper in the summer of 2019. And Jasper sits at the junction of three valleys and experiences daily high winds that shift around the compass. Now, these red trees that you see that I've circled, and there are a few more of them, but you can see these are also dead from mountain pine beetle, and they're right in proximity to Jasper residences. And this is from Natural Resources Canada from 2012, showing the area that has been affected by the mountain pine beetle. That's from 2012. Most of that is still standing, and that's why we have really super big fires here from time to time. There's lots of information about the mountain pine beetle that you can find on Natural Resources Canada. And here's a headline: Jasper National Park not prepared for potential forest fire catastrophe, researchers say. Yet the Parks Canada people said we're quite comfortable with where we are with our own emergency planning. So what about the mountain pine beetle? Well, here's the little rascal. They infest the bark of trees and cause them to die. So first the forest turns red, then it turns gray, and 10 years later it turns black. So Jasper National Park's pines turning red in the wake of mountain pine beetle. And this research said in 2017, pine needles accumulate a lot of flammable substances when they're dying, and the bark is filled with flammable pitch. If a fire were to rip through Jasper right now, it would burn like an inferno. This woman, Janice Cook, warned in 2017 mountain pine beetles consumed 18 million hectares in BC. That's like half the size of Sweden. We have more than 1 million hectares that have already been affected in Alberta. The time to act was yesterday. And here they are, all black. Premier Smith saying it's a tough day, touring the townside of Jasper yesterday. My heart is with everyone who lost their homes and businesses. There will be a long road to rebuilding, but we will be with you every step of the way. So, it was and still is a disaster waiting to happen. And here's what happened. About 30% of the town was destroyed by flames. But some things survived. So people are looking at the foreground and seeing all these things that didn't survive. This looks like maybe it was a trailer of some kind. Completely gone. Most of the prefab homes are gone, as I understand it. But in the background, there's some green grass that was probably watered. There's some unburned deciduous trees. And there is an intact structure here. So some things survived, and it's important after a fire to try and determine why. Why did some things survive and why did others burn? And again, here's Malign Lake Road, shrouded by standing deadwood, all that red stuff. And we've often heard, especially people from the Liberal part of the federal government, saying that Canada's burning. Well, here's why. Canada's burning because of bad forest policy, not climate change. Ottawa let wildfire fuel pile up in Jasper for decades. So let's see if that's true. First of all, here is the Jasper Wildfire Complex as of July 25th. So these red lines show where the fire is burning, and here is the town of Jasper. There you can see the town of Jasper, and on a wider shot before the fire you can see all of the pine beetle damage, again the red trees. Oops. And Jasper, a wildfire disaster, not if but when. This was the Strategic Environmental Assessment of Jasper National Park Management Plan from 2022, and these very red-hot sort of fuchsia lines show the mountain pine beetle damage from 2018, and the orange bits show the 2019 damage. And we can see that about 30% of the town was destroyed by flames. The fires are still burning in the area, so hopefully there won't be any cycling back to the town. I think the fires are still just burning out in the wilderness areas. But it was never a matter of if as much as when. So a comment from our forestry consultant: the national park forests have become the silviculture equivalent of elder care facilities. They are increasingly prone to the destructive effects of insects, pests, disease, and physical damage. Old and diseased pine trees are preferentially attacked by the mountain pine beetle. The problem has been recognized, and controlled burns have been mired in bureaucracy and public controversy. So a controlled burn is, many people will already know this, but I'll just mention it. Controlled burn is when the fire crews stake out a specific area of the park or any part of a forest or even on anybody's property. They stake it out, they pick a day and time, they have all the crews ready, and they burn it on purpose. But it's controlled because they have decided what area they really want to burn to rid it of insects or get rid of old deadwood, whatever the case may be, and they have all the resources standing by to put the fire out in case it gets away. So they can do that in a selective manner over the course of sometimes in winter, sometimes in the wildfire season if conditions are right. Again, if the wind comes up, then your controlled burn is probably going to be canceled. So it seems that there was an emphasis by the parks people on natural state of the forest. So this commentator says when the Rocky Mountain National Parks were first established over 100 years ago, the historical landscapes featured highly varied mix of vegetation. This natural state was the result of prairie fires frequently intruding into the Front Ranges, suppressing the forest growth in large areas of the parks. When the parks were established, though, this natural state of fire was soon artificially altered by a policy of protecting all growth by the vigorous suppression of fires. That means putting them out. The result was a gradual replacement of the valley bottom prairies and immediately adjacent uplands with ever denser stands of coniferous trees, sometimes referred to by firefighters as fireworks on a stick. This new, humanly created landscape gradually became accepted as the natural state, when in reality it's nothing of the sort. This short-sighted policy was vigorously opposed by provincial officials who managed Alberta's forests, and the forests in Alberta are separate from forest management of the parks. The parks are managed by Parks Canada. And the Alberta officials were afraid that the parks were becoming tinderboxes, which would not only destroy the federal parks, but once started and out of control, would spread into adjacent Alberta forests. These provincial forests, in contrast, were being actively managed by a wide variety of means, including controlled burns, logging, and allowing natural fires to run their course if lives or private property were not at risk. Okay, so that's one person's opinion. A lot of people will disagree with that. Anyway, let's look a bit at what happens when you have a pine beetle infestation. So normally your trees look like this. Then they start to get infested. They're green infested. They go yellow. Then they go red. And then they go gray. So these are the first stages of impact where the foliage dies, the red attack, and fall to the ground, gray attack. Fires that occur in these conditions are like setting the family Christmas tree on fire. And if you've ever done that in safe conditions, whoosh, goes up like nothing, flat. So this is a comparison set of images showing the difference between trees that have been attacked by mountain pine beetle but not logged and those that were logged. So the large fires associated with the mountain pine beetle outbreak occur about a decade after the trees are killed. This is when the crown, that's the top of the tree, start to fall apart with branches and snags falling to the forest floor and creating a crib of suspended fuels. Remember that it's the weight of the fuels that's responsible for the intensity of the fire. So you can see here over time going down, the trees start to fall apart, then they start to fall over, and ultimately there will be new growth, but in the meantime, all these things that have fallen over are just fuel for the fire, literally. By contrast, if there's a logging process that goes on, of course, suddenly there's no trees. It looks pretty barren and ugly, but then little trees start to pop up, and soon enough you have a nice brand new forest. So here's a picture of a relatively open stand of trees about a decade after a mountain pine beetle attack. And you can see they're starting to fall over. Look at all this stuff on the ground. And here's what happens when a fire gets in there. Whoosh! So what happens is it ladders up all the other trees, right? This stuff starts at the bottom and then just goes way up all these other trees. Once it gets to the crown, then it can jump miles and miles, depending on the wind. It will just fly miles and miles in the wind. Pine cones, flaming pine cones. So, you know, what our forestry consultant said is that we should learn from this disaster now, right now. So he said the Jasper fire contains 2 mountain pine beetle attacks, the earlier attack from about 2000 and the most recent of 2018, still in its red attack to gray attack stage. This is likely the worst combination of fuels, a flashy ignition fuel type in the middle of suspended and ladder fuels from the earlier infestation. The forests in and around Jasper are some of the best studied and inventoried forests. It would be important for wildfire experts to get on the ground as soon as possible and better understanding the fire behavior. In British Columbia, they're still using the standard fuel types that grossly underestimate the fire behavior. You do not want to be surprised by using the wrong fuel type when you're planning a suppression response. And we'll look at that as we go on. So, as mentioned before, things were not always this way in the woods. Now, these come from this wildfire fire and fuel management program in the contiguous mountain national parks. This was from 2008. So we should read from top to bottom here. So here we have an image in Jasper National Park, Old Fort Point, 1915. The east of Jasper town site shows the valley bottom near Twin Lakes. The landscape consisted of patchy, open grassland, shrubland, possibly the result of fire or other disturbances. But if we go forward to 1997, we see that we now have dense, closed canopy coniferous stands have replaced the open, patchy mosaic of grassland, shrubland, and sporadic juvenile forest. So the conifers have taken over completely, but it wasn't always that way. If we look here, we have 1915 Jasper National Park, a railway photograph, portion of the CPR along the Miette River. The landscape consisted of mixed forest stands, so that's mixed kinds of trees, like deciduous trees and conifers. But here we have 1997, the encroachment of forest up valley sides is evident, as well as crown closure, meaning that this is all closed in by coniferous forest now. And other changes over time. We see here Pope's Peak from the railroad above Hector Station, August 1901. So this photo is taken following a stand replacing fire. So all of these trees were burnt out. And by 2007, we have, this is at Sink Lake and Pope's Peak from the railway near the Kicking Horse Pass. We have post-fire succession has resulted in closed conifer fire. This is from Mount Rundle and Echo Creek, Banff National Park, Bow River Valley. So this is not Jasper, this is Banff, which is located further down in Alberta. This is from 1918. You can see that the riparian areas, that means along the river, are dominated by aspen and willow species. But by 2005, 40 Mile Creek, Banff National Park, Bow River Valley, riparian areas have succeeded to more homogeneous conifer-dominated stands. So nature isn't just one thing, and it changes over time. And a lot of times, because we have suppressed fires, we haven't actually allowed nature to continue in the path that it would. So now we're going to look at some fuel types, because there's a combination of different fuel types and they affect how the fire develops and runs. So you can look at this for more information. We're going to deal with about 4 of these. So the fuel types that were relevant to the Jasper National Park wildfire, C2, boreal spruce. This is like moderately stalked well-stocked black spruce, which is normally on lowland and upland sites. Leafless aspen. So this is a fuel type characterized by pure, semi-mature, trembling aspen, stands before bud break in the spring or following leaf fall and curing the lesser vegetation in the autumn. There's also white spruce and balsam slash. This is type S2. This is characterized by slash resulting from tractor or skidder clear-cutting logging of mature to over-mature stands of white spruce. And 01 or 01, grass. This field type is characterized by continuous grass cover with no more than occasional trees or shrub clumps that do not appreciably affect fire behavior. The proportion of cured or dead materials in grasslands has a pronounced effect on the fire spread there and must be estimated with care. So again, from the forestry expert, my calculations on the fire behavior indicated that potential head fires intensities had been in excess of direct suppression since May. The rate of spread using only a 9 kilometers per hour wind speed indicated potential spread rates of 40 meters per minute in forest fuels and 70 meters per minute in grass or herbaceous fuels. Maximum wind speed gusts were nearly 40 kilometers per hour yesterday, that being July 2024, July 24, 2024, with 180-degree swings in the direction due to the terrain configuration. That's related to how Jasper sits in that valley. If your wildfire management plan is exclusively based on suppression, you will invariably build up a situation where suppression is no longer possible. So what that means is that if your wildfire plan is that you're going to be capable of putting fires out, and you're not going to concern yourself with wildfire prevention or mitigation by taking out substantial amounts of the fuel load, whether that be the grasses or these other trees that I mentioned, and especially all the dead trees and branches on the ground. If you're not going to address that at all, ultimately the fuel load will be so great that no matter how fantastic your firefighting plan is, no matter how many water bombers you have, how many wildfire fighters you have, you will not be able to stop a wildfire of high intensity. And we'll look at some of that material right now. So there's been a lot of planning going on since 2004. Those comparison pictures I had earlier, they came from this report. This was written in 2008. So lots of reports were written, but we're not too clear on how much of the reports were taken seriously. Something happened in the valley in July. There was a sudden vapor pressure deficit, an extreme lack of humidity. So this graphic shows that. This indicates that on July 1st, 2024, the park should have been closed and access to backcountry limited to minimize the population at risk. Steps should have been taken then to start to fireproof the town site. The videos that our wildfire consultant has seen so far focus on the destruction, but if you look at the edges of the videos, you'll see the examples where structures did not burn. This is typical of an ember storm, and the giveaway is the green lawns. So note the U.S. Department of Fire Service is now referring to the vapor pressure deficit as the hot, dry, windy index. But you can see how this suddenly exacerbated at the beginning of July. Just to be clear, this is not relative humidity. The VPD describes the physical drying power of the air. 30% relative humidity at 30 degrees Celsius is accompanied by a VPD with far greater drying power than 30% relative humidity at 20 degrees Celsius. And let's talk about the effect of the wind. The daily wind speeds around Jasper are 9 to 12 kilometers per hour. Under those conditions, the wildfire behavior from July 20th onward were so extreme that there was no possible suppression of the flaming front. That big, flat red line is intensity at which you have to get out of the way and retreat to a defensible distance and focus on wetting the structures and values at risk from the approaching ember storm. That big red line has flame heights that are about 5 meters tall. At head fire intensity of 100,000, the flame height is greater than 15 meters tall. So this is the line from which you have to retreat. This is the intensity from which you have to get out of the way. And here are those fuels that we were talking about, the C2, D1, etc., etc. You can go back and check that yourself, but you can see how this just roared into an inferno. And FireSmart, that's the FireSmart program for protecting buildings and mitigating wildfire, it assumes a setback distance of 10 meters. At 9 kilometers per hour, the head fire intensities have a setback distance of 60 to 80 meters. The greater the head fire intensity, the stronger the convective column and the greater height and lofting distance of firebrands. So that means that sparks are being thrown, ejected, very high and very far as this intensity increases. And the slope also intensifies the head fire intensity. Compare the 9 kilometer per hour to the 30 kilometer per hour gusts which occurred every day too. So this is the 9 kilometer per hour with a 36% slope. Okay. And just to be clear on what facing the fire means, this is the surface fire behavior, and this illustrates the wildfire suppression capabilities for Jasper on July 21st for the 9 kilometers per hour wind speed for different fuel types. The different tones of these colors are the approximate under which direct suppression can be used. So you can fight fires by hand at this level. You can fight them with machines like graders, dozers, that kind of thing at this level. And you can fight them with an air attack here, and they're beyond control here. It's an inferno. So you can also see the flame length in meters increases dramatically. The graphic program used doesn't allow head fire intensities of greater than 57,000 on the x-axis, which is unfortunate, as the C2 is at 58,000 kilojoules per square meter, and the S2 is at 83,000 kilojoules per square meter. So the only hope of direct suppression is going to be by air in the mixed forest, that's the M2, and the deciduous fuel types, which is here. But what is scary about this graphic is that this pretty much is the predicted wildfire behavior of the Jasper wildfire since June 29th, 2024. And fire characteristics, this will just give you a bit more information on that. If you want to understand a bit more, you can go and have a look at this report. It's from the USDA, but you know, firefighters use very similar terms and constructs. So fires can generally be attacked at the head or flanks by persons using hand tools. The hand line should hold the fire. But here we have the fires are too intense for direct attack on the head by persons using hand tools. Hand line cannot be relied on to hold the fire. Equipment such as dozers, pumpers, and retardant aircraft can be effective. And here we see fires may present serious control problems, torching out, crowning, and spotting. Control efforts at the fire head will probably be ineffective. And then we have the inferno phase. Crowning, spotting, and major fire runs are probable. Control efforts at the head of fire are ineffective. So they just totally take off. And here's a visual version of that. Note this author is using a different unit of measurement here, but these are the differing intensities. So here you could use hand tools. It's a low vigor surface fire. This is moderately intense. This becomes much more intense, producing gray to black smoke, organized surface flame front, a moderate or fast rate of spread along the ground, and short aerial bursts and short-range spotting will occur with these fires. Control efforts at the fire's head may fail. And then, of course, we get into these huge intensity fires, and this is the blow-up or large disastrous fire, which is what we saw in Jasper. So now compare 9 kilometers per hour to 35 kilometer per hour wind speed. And so I've set this graph, which is the one we saw before, but I've set it smaller and kind of parallel to this line here. If you recall, this is the line of retreat. So you can see that things really got out of hand as the wind speed went up to 35 kilometers per hour. The intensity just took off completely. And also the rate of spread. So at 9 kilometers per hour, 36% slope, the rate of spread was below this line. But as soon as we got to 35 kilometers per hour, boom, it took off. So there are some people like Don Braid has written an op-ed saying bad management has turned forests into fire bombs, bring back the indigenous ways. Well, you know, the indigenous ways are discussed in Cordy Timstra's wonderful book, The Chinchaga Firestorm, and he points out that indigenous cultural burnings were to stimulate medicinal plants and blueberries or to stimulate crops that would draw preferred wildlife to the area, but the cultural burns were banned for everyone over time as population grew, as a local burn might take off if the wind came up and there wouldn't be enough firefighting resources to address it. So, you know, we've actually learned so much from the terrible wildfires that have happened in the past. There's a great deal of wildfire science that is a compendium of information that helps us fight wildfires today in the way that we do. And the fire fundamentally shaped Forest Service practices. The Great Fire of 1910, which also affected Alberta, by the way, affected forest firefighting policy of the nation and influenced forest management to this very day. So we have this extremely advanced knowledge of wildfire and forestry management if people can just do their job without climate nuts and eco-bananas getting in the way. You know, lots of people have sacrificed their lives for this knowledge. So let's not waste it. And of course, the media are going on and on about climate change, as are many activists. But I invite you to read Robert PLK Jr.'s article about what the media won't tell you about wildfires. So this is on his Substack, but the main point is that the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has not detected or attributed fire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. And again, if we look at this seriously, imagine 32 million versus 32 billion of your tax dollars. So the federal government allocated 32 million to BC for fighting wildfires, but 32 billion collectively to Stellantis and VW to build EV batteries. Now, these are supposed to be stopping climate change, right? So BC got 32 of these, whereas the battery plant manufacturers got 32 of these. Just imagine what even one of these would do to help stop wildfires, especially with mitigation. And of course, eco-warriors have made things worse. Zipporah Berman was running the War in the Woods, the tree-hugging festival back in the 1990s, And she's probably one of the people most responsible for everyone seeing trees as sacred deities, even if they're dead. That's why you can't cut them down. But of course, she's a foreign-funded activist, and eco-warriors just make things worse. Like, here's Last Generation. This is a group of young people who are funded by the Climate Emergency Fund out of the U.S., and other donors as well. But they want to establish a national firefighting agency that trains and employs 50,000 firefighters. Well, in the catastrophe that we've just seen, that sounds like a good idea, except as I've just shown you, if your wildfire is out of control, it doesn't matter how many firefighters you have, you won't be able to stop it. Your best fire prevention action is to mitigate the risk of fire by removing the fuel load. We don't want to put out all wildfires. You know why? Because that's how the forest renews itself. So we do want to mitigate the risk of wildfire by reducing the amount of dead wood, especially around communities and critical infrastructure, whether they're pylons for high voltage lines, whether they're pipelines, whether they're transformers. Any of this critical infrastructure needs to be protected, so we need to cut back all the trees from that area. And certainly around communities and within communities, as you saw in the opening images, there were a lot of dead pine beetle trees right in Jasper, right beside houses. So, they have to come out. It's better to take them out and plant a new tree. It will look bad for a year or two, but suddenly you'll have this nice fresh growth. And you can't have these huge amounts of dead trees near critical facilities or near places where people live. We have to get rid of them. And once you mitigate that, then you don't need 55,000 firefighters. Then, you can manage with 1,000 firefighters, 500 firefighters. But if your plan is only suppression, only putting out wildfires, then as we saw in Jasper, you're doomed to fail. Because at some point, it's just too big. The fire gets too big and nobody can do anything about it. Now, the point here is these people at Last Generation seem to be using wildfire as a rationale for trying to force Canada to sign on a binding agreement with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the brainchild of Tzipora Berman or her backers. And they're claiming here, we know who started the fires. Conference after conference, our politicians have failed internationally, put an end to fossil fuels. The Paris Agreement is dead. We need a real treaty to end the fossil fuel era and provide a just transition for workers. I wonder how people would have evacuated from Jasper without fossil fuels. How would any of those structures have been saved without pumps to pump the water, without water bombers, without choppers? All of those run on fossil fuels. So, this is a ridiculous idea to think that fossil fuels caused the wildfire in Jasper. But that's what people are going to tell you. So, think about it. Like, if you want to read something, go and read that book by Cordy Timstra, Chinchanga Firestorm. The Chinchanga Firestorm happened in 1950. It started in BC and spread to Alberta. I think it burned 3.4 million acres of wildfire, of forest. The smoke pall was seen around the world. That's how big that fire was. And in Toronto, in the middle of the day, people were driving around with their lights on. People thought perhaps a nuclear apocalypse had happened. People didn't know what was going on. And it was a smoke pall from this enormous fire in northern Alberta and BC, the Chinchanga firestorm. But there were some settlers up there, some pioneers up there. They didn't have any support. They didn't have any water bombers. You read those stories in that book, it's terrifying. So before people start canceling for fossil fuels and claiming that they caused wildfires, do a bit more research. And back to these people. These people are now, by the way, blocking airports and access to airports around the world in an 8-country coordinated effort working with Just Stop Oil. So they want Canada to implement legally binding citizens' assemblies to tackle the climate and ecological crisis in less than 2 years. We can't trust our criminal government to take the measures necessary to save us, as they've known about the climate crisis for decades. We must put power into the hands of ordinary people to reach for the change that is necessary to secure us a livable future. Well, again, I've just shown you a lot of material by wildfire experts, people who have spent their life studying forests and wildfire behavior. You know, as I said, a lot of people have sacrificed their lives, and usually when those tragedies happen, there's a concerted effort to study how and why that wildfire, you know, trapped the firefighters. Where did the wind come from? Did people mistake the type of fuel load or the type of fuel types? There's been a lot of work done on it, a lot of scientific work. And this material is shared by all the different firefighting agencies in the region and internationally. So personally, I don't think putting together a citizens' assembly of ordinary people who are not wildfire and forestry experts is a good idea to stop wildfires, nor is it a good idea to stop climate change, because climate change is integral to this natural world. And people say, oh, look, you know, we had a lot of wildfires last year, all this area was burned last year, that's climate change. Well, no, that's an anomaly. That's what it's called in science, an anomaly. And climate change is measured over 30, 50, and 100-year and millennial timescales. So these are extreme events. They're terrifying for many of us, but these are not evidence of climate change. You'd have to have a statistical pattern showing that there is change, and the only statistics we have is actually that wildfire numbers are going down over the years, and so is the area burned normally. But again, as you've seen, we have 18 million hectares of standing deadwood from mountain pine beetle in Western Canada, so that's going to continue to burn off unless we go in and log it out or turn it into wood pellets or something. So, you know, the last generation faction, they're terrified because they've been reading some really hyperbolic climate catastrophe material, and it's really sad because they really literally think they are the last generation, and that's why they're taking these dramatic actions. And of course, they're driven on by people like this man, Chris Hatch. Pyrocene, it's poor forest management, not climate change, right? So he happens to be the husband of Tzipora Berman. And here he is writing in the National Observer, I don't know why some catastrophes hit deeper than others. It's not the first town incinerated in this new fossil-fueled pyrocene. So again, you know, they're trying to tie it to fossil fuels, and what are they tying it to? The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And even last year, the federal government exploited the wildfire disaster to push a global price on carbon at the UN Climate Week. So Minister Guilbeault was there with the Prime Minister, both of them telling everyone that climate change was seen in our wildfires last year. Really terrible, I think, exploiting the disasters that befell so many people. So really the thing is, we have to keep learning rather than exploiting these tragedies. So here's a report that was done on an examination of the Lytton, BC wildland urban fire destruction. This is by Jack Cohen and Alan Westhaver. So that's something to have a look at. Why some homes survived, learning from the Fort McMurray Wildland Urban Interface fire disaster, also Alan Westhaver. This one's a bit older, but I think it's very good, especially for Albertans because it relates to our context. This is related to the Slave Lake wildfires of 2011. That was an incidence of arson, but up to that point in time, it was the biggest wildfire disaster in Alberta in terms of losses, financial losses and losses of property. This is the report where they finally figured out that, you know what, wildfire season starts actually in May. It doesn't start in the summer. So this report recommends that by April, I think it was April 15th or April 19th, that all the wildfire crews and contracts be in place, everybody be ready to go by that time. Because that shoulder season of May, that season between winter snow melt and spring rain, that is historically the time when many of the biggest wildfires in Alberta have started. And as I mentioned before, so many wildland firefighters have given their life in saving others, and we have learned so much. So let's honor their sacrifice and not call it climate change. This is a good book, Young Men and Fire. It's a novel based on the tragedy of the Man Gulch fire of 1949. And if you like something that's a bit on the artistic side that memorializes their sacrifice, this is a rather moving song. This is Dr. Judith Curry. She's a climate scientist, and she's got this kind of plain language, short form, Climate Uncertainty and Risk, or the longer form, her book. This is available free of charge. This is on Amazon. So she said in an earlier post, thinking that catastrophes like major hurricane landfalls, massive forest fires, etc. will be cured by eliminating fossil fuel emissions is laughable. Well, it's not really funny. Thinking that eliminating fossil fuel emissions will solve the problem of extreme weather events is very sad, sort of on the level of doing rain dances. Everything that goes wrong, they blame on fossil fuel-driven climate change. Imagine how surprised they would be if we were ever to be successful at eliminating fossil fuel emissions and then we still had bad weather. So a bit of good news, according to Sean Amato here, Jasper the bear standing tall in a pic shared by the town. Even though the fire is still out of control, hotter weather is coming, crews are bucketing around Marmot Basin. There's no damage update there yet, but the fire is 32,000 hectares, largest in the park in 100+ years. But here's Jasper, the bear. He's still standing. So that's good. Good sign. So overall, CO2 is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate. And that's a quote from Dr. Judith Curry. I hope this presentation has given you some interesting information, some links to more information if you're keen to learn more about wildfires and park management. I hope most of all that it helps society to make good public policy based on evidence and not on ideology, not on climate change ideology. You know, we've been paying a carbon tax for a long time now, and actually one of our followers on Twitter said something really good, that the Jasper Park wildfire is proof that the carbon tax doesn't work. So that's not really a scientific statement, but it struck a good note with me. Anyway, you know, Jasper is going to need a lot of help. All the people there are going to need our help to get back on their feet. So whatever you can do to help. I think there's some matching donations from the province and federal government. And I hope that people can, you know, not get into fights about these things, whether it's climate change or whether it's forest management. Let's have open civil debate on these matters. Let's advocate for full cost-benefit analysis, and Let's try and install good public policy instead of ideology as our way forward. I think that'll be more effective, and hopefully will protect more people's lives as well, and their property, and our beautiful parks. So thanks very much for listening to this presentation. If you like our work, please like, subscribe, give us a comment down below. You can also join Friends of Science, become a member, then you'll get our newsletters and our updates. It's $40 a year, $80 for 3 years. And you can also donate if you like. This is our 22nd year of operation. We provide free education on climate science insights and energy policy insights to the public and policymakers. You can donate by e-transfer, contact@friendsofscience.org. And you can also donate online if you like. Again, thank you for watching, and let's hope that wildfire is controlled and contained in Jasper. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.